Hi Mark, thanks for sending in these clips. It's really great to be able to help you with this. So what I'm going to do is just basically take you through what I see in the swing. I'll take you through position by position exactly what's going on. And this is just kind of an opportunity for me to give you a bit more of an understanding of what goes on in your golf swing, and give you a bit of an idea as to why the outcomes that you're seeing, the kind of hooky shots maybe coming into place. And I'm going to provide you as we go some comparisons to Dustin Johnson. Um, he is obviously world number one, the best out there, but he's got a lot of great ideas in his golf swing that I think you could benefit from. He kind of sets up quite similar to you to the ball with the strong grip, and kind of like the wide setup. And I think there's some things that you could see in his swing and potentially benefit from. So, first of all, if I start on the left here and kind of take you from the beginning, so what we see is ever so slightly too much flexion in your knees, and your butt a little bit too far back. So what this does, basically your weight is slightly too in your heels. So the pressure point here, which is the line from the back of your armpits, should go kind of through your knees and through the balls of your feet. So you can kind of see how where it is at the top here, the back of your armpits is then a bit behind kind of your kneecap and then a little bit too far back on your feet. So what we'd essentially want to do is take a little bit of the flexion out of your knees, stand you up a bit more, and this would have the impact potentially of raising the handle a little bit as well. And I think that would just put you in a slightly better position to start off with. But all in all, that's kind of all I'd say from that angle. And then face on, obviously we see the first thing would be that your kind of left and lead hand, your glove hand, is quite strong, which, as you'll see from DJ, isn't really a problem. We can play very good golf from there, but it's just something to be aware of with kind of what we need to match it up with in the rest of the golf swing. And then we also see, if I pull you to setup, sorry. So we see a nice sort of position with like these flat hips and then a nice bit of tilt in your shoulders, which is kind of matched by your head, which is obviously nice with a driver. It's going to promote that upward attack angle. Then what we also see, which I think we could potentially work a little bit on, is this front foot is very square, where we may want it to be slightly more flared out. This is just going to help you kind of rotate through the shot, rather than kind of being a bit limited and maybe having to reposition your heel as you go through. And then I would say that I like to see quite a good relationship between this lead arm and the club shaft, so in more of a kind of a straight line, especially for someone like you. If I was to, what I'll do is I'll draw you up, show you here, and pull in the man himself. I'm already getting him out. So if we were to look at someone like DJ with that strong grip as well, he maintains, when we come into impact, quite a lot of shaft lean here. And this is just a way of him kind of squaring the club up, one of the matchups that helps him square up that shut club face. So if we could get a little bit more of that angle there. And what you'll also see while I'm at it from DJ here is that kind of lead foot position that I was talking about, where it's ever so slightly splayed out. I think that would help quite a lot. So if I bring you back, so that's your setup. So there's a few bits and bobs in there to maybe take a look at. But then what I want to do now is take a look at kind of the early move in the backswing, so your takeaway. And what we see, and this is kind of a theme within your swing, is quite a lot of lateral motion. So quite a lot of lateral motion to the left, so to the right, sorry. So if I just take you back Oh, I have to redraw these lines. I take you back to that position where it's parallel. I get these lines right. Quite a lot of movement in the camera. Here we go. Perfect. So we see that you move off the ball quite a lot fairly early on, which, you know, is quite indicative of me, to me, of maybe someone who has played a bit of baseball in the past. It's more of kind of a lateral move sport, whereas we want to stay kind of more centered and rotate around that point. So you'll see from this perspective as well what we see. So this leg stays fairly flexed, which is kind of indicative of you moving off the ball. And what we'll also see from this angle is that this arm starts to flex quite early. So your right arm starts to bend quite early, which is indicative of kind of what we'll see later on, where you get quite a lot of arm flex and not too much width because of it. So as we move on into the next position, you'll see that this kind of shift onto the right side, with everything kind of continues, and that we get quite a narrow kind of situation here where you've got quite a lot of wrist flexion. So that angle there, is quite significant, where we may see kind of the pros more at that kind of angle with the club at this point. And then when we look from this angle, what we'll see is that you're quite towards the back of your torso, so your hands are quite deep here, which isn't necessarily an issue, but we'll see with your pattern that it can sometimes promote, the hand path shifting too much towards the right on the way down, which is something that you fall foul of. So this kind of whole move of this arm flexing, which promotes it going in, and then carrying on up here, gets that hand path a bit too far behind you, I would say. And then when we move to the top, what I would say is, as a good thing, you have what we call quite a lot of hand depth. So we draw this line, which is kind of your baseline, which goes through your laces, through your belt buckle, and you maintain quite a lot of hand depth at the top, which we'll see quite a lot of the better players have. But what I would say is that this elbow is quite, abducted from your body, so it's quite away from your body, which leads to this crossed position at the top. So essentially, the more this elbow is in front of the body, so if it was tucked in or in front, it would bring this shaft angle more this way rather than being this crossed at the top. And then when we look from the face on position, we'll see you continue to shift over to the right. And I kind of want to draw these two positions because they're very important. So this leg position is essentially what I want to focus on, with this idea of kind of your lateral shift onto your right side rather than extending up through it. So we see it on this one as well. So you have quite a lot of flexion still in that leg, which when I draw up the comparison to Dustin, it'll become quite clear. When we want this, we can move slightly off it with the driver, but we want this kind of staying quite centered in the middle, like I was saying. And if we compare your leg structure at the top here to Dustin's, you'll notice his leg is much more kind of straight, so he's extended in the middle, whereas yours is flexed, and you've kind of shifted off to that right side. So what we'd ideally want to do is keep you more kind of in the center like Dustin is, and then have kind of relationship with that leg where you're pivoting around it. So you'd have more of that kind of structure, which you see here with Dustin with this leg. Okay, so that's at the top. So kind of to conclude on the backswing, what I see is actually a lot of stuff that I like. It's quite an athletic move. You are moving, you're rotating, but I see just too much lateral motion and flexion in that leg as kind of the key issues. And the kind of position at the top with the arm being a little bit kind of out behind you, that is also where I suspect the kind of connection with baseball. Because if we could get this elbow maybe a little bit more in this way, it would kind of sort this out for you. So then moving into the downswing, so the first kind of move that we see is this shift back onto the left side rather than any real rotation. So you'll see your hips there are basically just laterally shifting to the left, and at the same time your shoulders are unwinding quite early. So your shoulders, when we move here, have already unwinded by, a fair amount, where we may like to see more of a situation where the shoulders are resisting while the lower body rotates round, which is what gets us that nice position of kind of being in the slot almost, where we can hit nice kind of high draws. So you'll see that from the down the line position as well. What I'd like to do is just draw, to give you a reference point, draw this circle of where your hands were on the way back, and then when we go through, come to the top, you'll see as you shift over and your shoulders spin out early, we get this hand path shifting quite considerably to the right. What I do like is that where we might see this in a lot of people, we could potentially see this club getting way too steep. You actually shallow it out quite nicely, and as we continue, you continue to shallow it out. But the issue here is that your hands are just a little bit too high. So these hands here, they're too far out in front of you, which is really kind of the impact of what we see, where you have this lateral shift and at the same time this kind of rotation movement of the shoulders. So shoulder spinning out too early, laterally shifting back, and then when we get to about here, where you've kind of shifted that weight back onto the lead foot and you're more centered, then we start to get the hips rotating round. You'll see that every frame I go now, the hips rotate. So I think if we could, rather than being over here, if we could be in the center, again, bringing it back to this backswing position in the center with that structure where you've kind of rotated around your pelvis rather than shifted everything over here, then coming in on the way down, you could just rotate nicely like you do from kind of this frame, rather than having to have that initial shift over to this side, which from the behind angle is what sends this hand path over here. So then, interestingly, what you do coming into the ball is that where a lot of people, what they would do is that they would, from this position where the hands are too far out in front, they would shift their butt really far forward in an attempt to kind of drop the hands and the club kind of down and back a little bit. But you don't, so you kind of maintain the hands where they are, which leads to quite a high handle. So if I take you back to kind of the start of your swing, and we'll do this on both, what I'm going to do is just draw a circle where your hands were, and then I'm going to draw one here. I'll actually draw a little bullseye here. we'll get your hands, then we'll get a line going that way, a little line going that way. So basically we want this to kind of return here as much as possible. It's not going to happen perfectly. You will return with a little bit of a higher handle than you start with. But basically what a higher handle will do is it will push the club face kind of out to the right. So if you have a higher handle, push everything out to the right, and it will also it will make it a little bit less stable because the club head isn't in the position it was designed to be in at impact. So you may get some off-centered hits that don't behave properly, and it'll be also more difficult for you to hit it out of the middle. So you'll potentially find that you'll get more strikes on the bottom of the club than you do kind of if you were to return it normally. So when we look at you, we'll see this in action. So you'll see coming into the ball here, your hands are much, much higher than they were at setup. And then from behind you, we'll see a very similar thing where your hands are much, much higher. And I actually think that you've kind of got into this pattern because it's almost matched up with this hand path that goes very far this way. And then if you keep the handle high, so you've got a path that's going to be sending the ball left, and then you've got a handle that's going to try and keep it right. And it's in a way its own matchup to try and hit it straight, but it's quite often going to lead to bad outcomes, and it's very, very difficult to hit consistently. I know I wouldn't be able to do it. But it all comes back to this shift to the right. So if you didn't shift to the right, then at the top of the swing, you wouldn't be making the shift back to the left, which, because your shoulders rotate while your hips aren't rotating, sends this hand path out to the right. And then because your hand path's out to the right, you hold the handle up as a means by squaring it up. So you'll get to see now the kind of chain of events that occur in the golf swing and how we may want to change it. So the two things that I'm going to get you to work on, and I'm going to kind of bring back this example of Dustin. So the first one is going to be, we'll see it from the front on, the way your legs work in the backswing. So we're going to want you to stay far more centered and rotate around. So really feeling like you're kind of rotating into this hip, and like your right hip almost goes towards the target and back with this leg extending. So that's the first thing I'm going to have you feel. And then the other thing is going to be the way your elbow is at the top. So if we compare it to you, so this is this other issue of the flying elbow. So we see this elbow is abducted here, whereas with Dustin, it is much more kind of connected to his body. There's much less gap there, which leads to this scenario where his club is much more kind of down the line and yours is crossed. So I think we can work on those two things as the main things, and then a little bit around just getting this set up sorted. So getting the pressure point a little bit more towards the balls of your feet rather than being so sat back, which will also lift this handle up a little bit more as well. So we can work on those things. I think it's going to be really good for us. And I think there is a really good golf swing in there because you're clearly athletic, with just a bit of work on the way you move and kind of the ideas around how the legs and the pelvis move in the golf swing. So I'll see you for the drills video, and cheers, mate.